This is the morning of the 11th of November. Clip put up by MSNBC. Lawrence, with Trump's shutdown ending, Dems are closer than ever to forcing Epstein files release. You know, Trump's going to be remembered as being the first felon president. The first president that's had two massive government shutdowns. This one lasting longer than the first one in his first term. Let's listen to what Lawrence has to say. Plays for just under 19 minutes.
In his first term, Donald Trump created the longest government shutdown in history. And now in his second term, Donald Trump has set the record again for the new longest government shutdown in history. The end of the government shutdown was forged when 5 Senate Democrats, and only 5, changed their position in a compromise that forced every Senate Republican to change their positions, while it also forced Donald Trump to change his position. And it has forced every Republican member of the House of Representatives to now change their positions. So this is 5 Democrats who changed their position, and 53 Republican senators, 217 Republican House members, and 1 Republican president, a total of 271 Republicans who changed their positions and are now supporting a version of a budget bill that they said they would never support. And 5 Democrats who changed their position to vote for that same bill, which was proposed by those 5 Democrats. So who caved here? What does caved mean? But this being Washington, the 5 changed votes on the Democratic side versus the 271 Republicans changing their position is being generally reported as the Democrats, meaning all of them, the Democrats abandoning their position, the Democrats caving, the Democrats losing the shutdown. So 5 Democrats changed their position, 271 Republicans changed their position to arrive at a compromise position. And it's reported as just the Democrats caving. Now, if we want to use the word cave in place of the word compromise, 271 Republicans, including Donald Trump, caved to just 5 Democrats. Not 8, just 5, because 3 Democrats were already voting with the Republicans on this. 271 Republicans changed their position to accept the demands of 5 Democrats that created the 60-vote majority in the Senate to pass a bill. And what did those Democrats achieve? Well, those 5 Democrats forced Republicans, including Donald Trump, to agree to, first of all, they forced Donald Trump, who's been trying to stop funding supplemental nutrition assistance, to increase funding for food stamps. Increase it. That is not nothing. The 5 Democrats who changed their position managed to not just guarantee supplemental nutrition assistance funding for almost a year, but they actually got it increased. And no Republican wanted to do that. Donald Trump didn't want to do that. No Republicans wanted that. So they caved, if that's the word we're going to use, on that. The Republicans did. And all the Republicans are caving to that demand by those 5 Democrats for their votes. That's one of the things the 5 Democrats got for their votes. The 5 Democrats also obtained a guarantee to rehire every federal worker Donald Trump has fired during the government shutdown, every one of them. 4,000 people will get their jobs back, and they will get back pay because of this compromise that 5 Senate Democrats forced on 271 Republicans, including Donald Trump. The compromise also forces Donald Trump to deliver back pay to all federal workers, every one of them, affected by the Trump shutdown, something Donald Trump was trying to avoid. Donald Trump was trying to become the first president in history to deny back pay to every government worker affected by the shutdown. And those 5 Democratic senators got that back pay guaranteed. That is not nothing. They got something. They didn't get what they wanted. They didn't get everything. They didn't get the big thing. They got something. It should not be surprising that one of the 5 senators in this compromise is Tim Kaine of Virginia, where he represents one of the states with the most federal government workers per capita working in and around Washington, D.C.
Is this the...
Yeah, it just popped up.
It should also not be surprising that both of the Democratic senators from Nevada joined the compromise that will avoid the airport nightmares that were looming in America for Thanksgiving and Christmas if the shutdown continues. Las Vegas, Nevada is completely dependent on reliable air traffic into Las Vegas to feed the local economy, the biggest economy in Nevada. Las Vegas has other problems now with Canadians boycotting tourism in America, but the airport nightmare was something that Nevada's Democratic senators decided after 40 days they simply could not abide. For people in government who care about how the government works and how the country runs, which does not include Donald Trump, people who care about that, including our air traffic control system, for them, government shutdowns are actually painful every day. They're not a stunt. They're not a tactic. They're not a strategic tactic. They are painful. Government shutdowns are full of pressure every day for people who care about this government actually running and running well. And that pressure of a government shutdown gets greater every day. Some people who have never been in the room with a senator feeling that pressure seem to think that it's easy for senators from Nevada to do nothing to end the government shutdown that is ruining American air travel. People who have never seen or heard a majority or minority leader of the Senate actually try to persuade a senator on how to vote seem to think that it's easy. If you haven't worked in the Senate, you haven't actually seen it happen. It is not televised. It happens on the Senate floor when the senators are speaking privately and don't have microphones. It happens in the leader's office just off the Senate floor. And it happens in the Mansfield room and the LBJ room just off the Senate floor. Those rooms were named for previous Senate majority leaders who were thought to be masters of the Senate. Democratic senators meet in the LBJ room. The minority party meets in the LBJ room for their group lunches. The majority party meets in the Mansfield room for their group lunches. No reporter, no pundit who claims expertise in this arena has ever been allowed in one of those rooms while those meetings were happening. No authors of books about political science have ever been allowed in those rooms. They have no idea what it's like for a Democratic leader of the Senate trying to guide every Democrat in the Senate in a room together at the same time. Very few Senate staffers are ever allowed in that room. There are usually no more than 2 or 3 staffers in that room. I was in that room many times in the 1990s when Bill Clinton was president, and a masterful Senate Majority Leader, George Mitchell of Maine, was running that room. There was a moment in those early Clinton years in that room when it seemed that the only reason 2 senators didn't start throwing punches is that they were seated too far apart from each other when they were yelling at each other. They were 2 men who fully respected each other, were very friendly with each other, usually voted the same way, but that day almost came to blows. Because that's how tense it can be in that room. And that is how important the work is. Those 2 senators had conflicting opinions that day, and both of them thought that what they wanted to do was the best thing for the country. That was not an egotistical shouting match. That was a shouting match about the future of this country, a shouting match about what this country needed at that moment. And luckily, at that moment, the most tense moment I've ever seen in that room, in the Mansfield room, John Glenn was in the room. John Glenn was in the room that day, a veteran Navy combat pilot who was the first person to orbit the Earth as an astronaut. He was a hero to everyone in that room long before any of us ever met him. And in a soft voice, he calmed the room and got everyone back on track, trying to figure out how to work together. The Senate is lucky when it has giants like John Glenn in the room, world-class heroes who command everyone's admiration all the time. But Senator John Glenn was not a leader. He was never a leader. I never heard a senator say, I'm voting for it because John Glenn is voting for it. There is no more difficult thing to try to do in the United States Senate than to lead. Very few senators have ever been able to do it, either at the committee level or at the majority or minority leader level. The Republican leaders of the Senate during the Trump era have not commanded party discipline. Fear of Trump voters in their states is what has commanded party discipline by Republicans in the Senate. Every Republican senator fears what will happen to them if they don't do what Donald Trump tells their voters in their states that they should do. The Democrats have never had an enforcer like that and never will. Chuck Schumer now has the impossible job of what the great George Mitchell and other majority leaders used to call herding cats. George Mitchell didn't mean that as an insult to Democratic senators. He meant that as a description of the degree of difficulty and complexity of trying to lead the United States Senate. It's like herding cats. Most outside observers have come to believe, it seems, that it's easy. That Chuck Schumer has easy decisions to make, clear, simple, easy, black and white. And that may be because Chuck Schumer made the job look too easy. As the Senate Majority Leader during the Biden presidency, Chuck Schumer pulled off the most significant string of 50-vote victories in the United States Senate that we have ever seen. Chuck Schumer did not have a majority of United States senators. Chuck Schumer was the leader of a 50-50 Senate for longer than any other leader in the history of the Senate. And Chuck Schumer could only get to 51 votes with Vice President Harris casting the tie-breaking 51st vote. But his legislative accomplishments during the Biden presidency and President Biden's legislative accomplishments were greater, especially when you consider the degree of difficulty than any other president and any other Senate leader of our lifetimes. When Lyndon Johnson was the majority leader of the United States Senate, no one at the time considered him a master of the Senate because Lyndon Johnson had 65 Democrats on his side of the Senate. The legendary Mike Mansfield, the longest-serving majority leader, had 68 Democrats in the Senate. With Lyndon Johnson as president and Mike Mansfield as the majority leader, they passed the Civil Rights Act in 1964 with 73 votes, with more than 24 Republicans voting for the Civil Rights Act. In 1965, Lyndon Johnson as president and Mike Mansfield as Senate Majority Leader passed the Voting Rights Act with 77 votes, and 30 of those votes were from Republicans. That was an easier job than any day of Chuck Schumer's job. Lyndon Johnson, the so-called master of the Senate, had no idea what budget reconciliation was because it did not exist until a year after Lyndon Johnson died. The Senate became dramatically more complex procedurally in 1974 when the Budget Act was passed that created the Senate Budget Committee and the House Budget Committee and the complex parliamentary rules of budgeting that have created the budget reconciliation process, a process that Lyndon Johnson would have found maddening, a process far more complex than the most difficult parliamentary challenges that ever faced Mike Mansfield or Lyndon Johnson when they served as majority leader. Chuck Schumer lives and breathes those complexities, and no one in the news media truly understands them. It is impossible to understand the workings of an institution when the most delicate operations of that institution are conducted behind closed doors. In the Mansfield room, the LBJ room, the Senate offices, the leader's office, never in front of cameras. Chuck Schumer voted against the compromise that 5 members of his party negotiated. The Democratic leader of the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, is also against that compromise. Mike Johnson is a huge loser in this compromise because Mike Johnson's bill that he passed through the House of Representatives by 5 votes is not going to be signed into law. It's going to be ripped up. Mike Johnson has to bring all of his Republican House members back, and all of them have to change their positions to agree with just 5 Senate Democrats who changed their positions. And when Mike Johnson does that, the Epstein files come back to life in the House of Representatives. Because when Mike Johnson convenes the House of Representatives, he will have to swear in the newest elected member of the House of Representatives, Adelita Grijalva of Arizona. She will then immediately become the 218th signature on a discharge petition that will force a vote of the House of Representatives on releasing the Epstein files, a vote Mike Johnson fears more than any vote ever cast during his speakership. That is why Mike Johnson closed down the House of Representatives and gave every Republican in the House a paid vacation for the last 7 weeks. Fear, abject fear of the Epstein files, where we know Donald Trump's name has to appear many times. Because, as Jeffrey Epstein said, Jeffrey Epstein was Donald Trump's closest friend for 10 years. The top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee, Jamie Raskin, has some questions for Donald Trump, which he put in writing and sent directly to Donald Trump at the White House. Congressman Raskin tells Donald Trump in writing, quote, "You have adamantly refused to release the Epstein files despite campaigning on their release. You lied when you denied authoring a lewd and incriminating birthday note to Jeffrey Epstein, and you ridiculously claimed that your unmistakable signature on that note was not your signature. You shut down the Department of Justice's ongoing investigation into Epstein's co-conspirators, and you expressly declined to rule out pardoning his main accomplice, convicted child sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell. The House Committee on the Judiciary has now received whistleblower information indicating that this cover-up goes even further into the Department of Justice and Bureau of Prisons than was known before. Documents and information received over the last several days by this committee indicate that under Dr. Tanisha Hall, the warden of federal prison Camp Bryan, the federal law enforcement staff working at the camp have been waiting on Ms. Maxwell hand and foot. This information also indicates that Ghislaine Maxwell is working on filing a commutation application with your administration, demonstrating either that Ms. Maxwell is herself requesting you release her from her 20-year prison sentence for her role as a conspirator in Jeffrey Epstein's international child sex trafficking ring, or that this child sex predator now holds such tremendous sway in the second Trump administration that you and your Department of Justice will follow her clemency recommendations. Congressman Raskin demands that Donald Trump, quote, make your former personal attorney and now Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche available for a public hearing immediately with our committee. I am demanding answers to these 3 questions. First, have you discussed a potential commutation or any form of presidential clemency for Ms. Maxwell and with Mr. Blanche, his underlings, or anyone else in your administration? Second, have you directed Mr. Blanche or anyone else in your administration to provide Ms. Maxwell with the transfer to the prison camp, favorable and preferential treatment in prison, or special accommodations for her communications and interaction with her family and the outside world? Third, what has Ms. Maxwell, her attorneys, family, or representatives promised you or your attorneys?
You know, it's too bad. Lawrence O'Donnell not only looks presidential, he can articulate as a president as well, other than that blabbering idiot, the one that can't even walk in a straight line. Lawrence O'Donnell is 74 years old, and he would make, I believe, an excellent president. So now that Speaker Johnson is going to have to swear in the Arizona representative, and they're going to have to vote on the release of the files. This could cause Donald to have a massive coronary. I'll attach the link. Let me know what you think. Pass it along. And thanks for listening.